Would you ask Mr. Roper to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Roper, ready to carry on?
Yes, yeah.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roper, can I ask you please to be shown CEL 401109, please? This is the 1st of August full test report from the BRE in its final version. And can we go within that, please, to page 6? At paragraph 3.2, under the heading description of the system in general and specifically description of product, it says figure 2 shows the system during construction. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then it says the system prior to test is shown in figure 3. Full details of the system specification and installation details have been provided by the client and are summarized in the following section. The system as built comprised of, and then there's a long list of bullet points. And you can see what's there, but also what's not there. You can see that there's no mention either of the magnesium oxide, the 6 millimeters magnesium oxide, or the 8 millimeters Marley Eternit cladding, is there?
No.
So when it says full details of the system specification and installation details have been provided by the client, that wasn't true, was it?
No.
Now, you say in your statement at paragraph 7.13, if we can look at that at page 17, that you looked at the draft test report. Now, this is an earlier draft, and I should just tell you the context of this is the meeting that you had with the NHBC on the 19th of June 2014. As we will come on to later. But when you did review a draft test report, which came in from the BRE, did you notice that it didn't refer to the 6 millimeters magnesium oxide?
I did, yes.
You did. And did you think that they'd not referred to it in their draft because they hadn't been told about it, or because Phil Clark had kept it a secret, or some other reason?
So after the second test, generally there's a period of 2 or 3 weeks where the rig is deconstructed. Jamie, who wasn't present at the second test, came down to the BRE with me and spoke to Phil Clark, and we looked at it during deconstruction, and it was Phil Clark's view that the 6 mil magnesium oxide wouldn't have made any difference, and the reason for the test passing was the increase in the cladding panel from 8 mil to 12 mil. So I can only assume that he omitted that detail because of his view on that day.
Do you remember any discussion with Mr. Clark to the effect that he ought to omit that detail?
No.
Let's look at the conversation. We have, I think, something in that from Mr. Hayes' statement. Can I ask you to be shown that, please? It's CEL 000100154. And I'd like you to go to page 22 in that document and look at paragraph 67. He says there, at a visit to the rig after the second test, I recall a conversation between PC, that's Phil Clark, at the BRE, and JR, that's you, Mr. Roper, where when asked by John Roper, Phil Clark agreed that the rig had passed the second test so easily that he suspected that it would have passed even without the additional material. I'm just pausing there. The additional material is the 6 millimeters magnesium oxide and the 8 millimeters Eternit panel on the top of it.
Yes.
Just using the thicker cladding. My recollection of the conversation is that it was led by JR, and PC's opinion in this regard was expressed in agreement with JR. We were on the second floor in an office looking down at the second test rig We all got on well with PC, and he was telling us about what it was like to work at the BRE, including that they had dealt with the burning of the cows when the mad cow outbreak occurred. Do you yourself recall that conversation as Mr. Hayes has recorded it here?
I do, yes.
Is there anything you want to add to what he said there, or are you happy with his recollection as he's recorded it?
Yeah, I think it's an accurate recollection.
Right, thank you.
Well, you could just help us to this extent. What he's suggesting is that it was you who expressed the opinion that the test would have been passed even without the additional material to which Mr. Clark assented. Is that your recollection? Did you put that forward as the
I think
view to take?
I think we had a conversation prior to Jamie and I going down to the test rig, and I can't remember whether that was directly after the completion of the test or whether that was when I was on the phone to him rearranging to come down, but he had mentioned that to me before, prior to us attending, and hence I prompted him to relay what he'd relayed to me before in front of Jamie.
Can you explain who made the decision not to refer to the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide in the BRE report?
Phil Clark.
Phil Clark. And if we go back to the report, the test report, that is to say, I'd like to look at page 7. That's CEL 401109, page 7, please. Let's look at paragraph 3.3.4. It says there, under rain screen, an array of vertical carrier rails were fixed to the helping hand brackets with both L and T aluminium brackets used. A single layer of 12 millimetres Marley Eternit Natura board was mechanically attached to the carrier rails with self-tapping stainless steel screws and washers. Again, that was not true, was it?
No.
In the sense that it wasn't the whole truth, was it?
No.
Because there's no reference to the 8 millimetres with the 6 millimetre magnesium oxide backing in those two places on the rig.
Correct.
Again, who made the decision not to refer to the 8 millimetres of Marley Eternit Natura board in those locations in this test report?
Phil Clark.
Right. Do you remember instructing Phil Clark to do that, or leaving him to do it and you not correcting him?
Leaving him to do it, and to be honest with you, I was surprised when the test report came across.
Surprised because?
Because he clearly understood the components in full of the second test and hadn't detailed it in the test report.
Right. So surprised that he was prepared to conceal those two elements of the rig, even though in fact you were prepared to go along with their installation.
Yes.
Yes. Can we look at page 9 in the same document? Under paragraph 5, or section 5, which is entitled Post-Test Damage Report, there's a subsection, 5.1, which is entitled External Layer. And it says, a schematic illustration of the damage to the system is shown in the condition of the cladding system after the test is shown in figure 18. It was noted that the insulation layer continued to burn past the 30-minute, with the flaming extinguished at 60 minutes. Now, note that there. If you now look at your witness statement, please, I'd like to go to page 18 in that document. And at paragraph 714 at the top of the page, you say, I did not know whether this was normal or not, and that this was the presentation. But was perhaps we should go back a little so I can put the question more fairly to you. If we go back a page, I'm so sorry, but pick it up at the foot of the previous page. This is the meeting we've just been looking at in June, and noticing that the first draft of this test report hadn't referred to the magnesium oxide in the list of components. And the next sentence is, my perception was that the board had a clear view as to how they wanted to market the product even before the test report was available. So that's the background to the next sentence, where you say over the page at paragraph 7.14, I did not know whether this was normal or not, but was told by Paul Evans that Kingspan were thought to be purposefully omitting information about their BS8414 test from their sales literature. This was Celotex's intended approach. Paul Evans and Paul Reed made clear that Celotex would not correct the information in the BRE report. Now, at this stage, this is in the context of the 19th of June meeting that you'd had with, or were having, with the NHBC at Celotex's premises in Hadley.
Yes.
In Suffolk, wasn't it? So when you say this was Celotex's intended approach, was it clear to you, at least at that meeting, even though you were simply looking at the draft of the BRE report at that stage, that Celotex were deliberately going to omit information about their BS8414 test from their sales literature?
Yes.
And that included this test report?
Correct, yes.
And they were doing so because Kingspan were thought purposefully to be doing the same?
Yes.
Deliberately, that is?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
So, to be clear, the real purpose here was to conceal the presence of the 6mm magnesium oxide and the 8mm panels from people who might be reading the test report as opposed to from the BRE itself.
Correct.
I see. And then you go on in that paragraph to say, Paul Reed asked whether anyone was likely to pick it up. There was some discussion about how often potential customers asked for the full test report, and the conclusion was that this never happened. When you say, or pick it up, Paul Reed asked whether anyone was likely to pick it up. What was the it there?
Pick up the fact that the details were omitted from the test report, I believe.
Right, so the magnesium oxide, 6mm, and the 8mm panels.
Correct.
Alternate panels. And you say that the conclusion reached was that potential customers never asked for the full test report. I'm summarising in a slightly different way what you've written there. Who is it who came to that conclusion?
I think that was the general view within the business. I referred to on Thursday during my evidence there that what happened quite commonly in the insulation market is that one manufacturer would obtain literature of another manufacturer via third-party distribution. What was clear is that the K15 test report had never been discovered, and I guess people assumed that the only reason that the test report wasn't in circulation was because it was never issued to customers, never asked for.
Were you effectively, I say you, the three of you, Celotex as the company, effectively relying on customers' apathy or lack of sophistication in seeking the full test report?
I think, as was the case with many test reports at the time, Celotex would do their utmost to avoid sending them out.
It may be that this is my fault for not understanding something, but at the moment I can't see how any customer could detect the absence of material from the BRE documentation, because what would they have to compare it with?
Sorry, I don't follow.
Well, it's suggested here that, and you suggested in your evidence that customers didn't ask for the full test report and that you could live with that risk that they might do so and thereby discover that there was information missing from it. What I find it difficult to understand is how could they ever discover that there had been magnesium oxide boards, for example, on the test rig?
Because it was never referenced in the... Yeah, I see. I don't know in terms of that. I know that there was a wider discussion not only around the detail of the description of the test, but equally some photographs that quite clearly to to me, showed that there was magnesium oxide. I think maybe that was where the discussion developed to, and the fact that it wasn't referenced in the description, but if you looked at the photographs alongside the test report, you can clearly see, well, I can clearly see the orange 8mm panel actually ends up being shown as a white board.
But those photographs, were they included in the test report?
They were, yes.
Right, no, I can see that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we're about to come to those.
I'm sorry again.
No, it's fine.
Get ahead of you, don't I?
No, but it's in all respects. Can I just then take a slight run up to this? Just looking at the generalities in paragraph 7.14, was it the case that because Kingspan K15 had, you thought, deliberately concealed material information about their BS 8414 test in their sales literature and thereby gained dominance over the above 18-metre market for insulation, Celotex's plan was basically to follow suit in order to enter that market?
That's how I understood it, yes.
That's the way you understood it. Now, I think, is it right, you were asked by Paul Evans and Paul Reed to ask the BRE to remove the final image in the test report?
That's correct.
Yes. Now, let's just look at the draft you were looking at this meeting, because I have been showing you the final version, because in that respect it didn't change, and indeed it doesn't. But let's look at CEL 401352. This is a draft, or the draft, of this report dated the 2nd of June 2014. We glanced at it earlier for the purposes of the chronology we went through before the break. And this is dated the 2nd of June 2014. And if we go to page, if we go to the last page 33, there are two pages I want to show you. Page 33, that's figure 16. We'll come back to that later. If we go to page 35, this is figure 18. And just to be clear for your benefit and for the chairman, this became figure 19 in the final 1st of August version of the full report. So there's no secrets here. This photograph remained in the final version. But this is figure 18. And in this report, it's the final photograph. This is a picture of the rig being dismantled, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And I think you can see clearly there, on the right-hand side, a layer of white material on top of the insulation, just above the level 2 thermocouples. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
And just, I know you don't have a pointer, but for those looking at this document, perhaps for the first time, that's the white rectangle above the charred material on the right of the rig. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And then there's also white material running along the top of the rig horizontally from right to left, and then from right to left on the return. Is that also the 6mm magnesium oxide?
Yes.
So both of those are showing the white 6mm magnesium oxide.
Correct, yes.
And those would have sat behind the orange 8mm Marley Ternit Natura boards.
Correct, yes.
Right. Now, if we compare that, and I think you've answered this, but it's useful to do it. If you go back to page 33 for comparison purposes and look at figure 17, or 16, this is one I was on a moment ago. We can look at 17 if you like, but 16 will do just as well. We can see that there, while the rig is still burning post-test, or smouldering perhaps, you can see the orange strips, and those are the Marley Ternit 8mm panels, aren't they?
Yes.
So that's where they were. Now, is that the image that you say in your statement at paragraph 7.16 that Paul Evans and Paul Reed asked you to ask the BRE to remove?
This image here?
Yes. So I'm so sorry. If you go back to 18 on page 35.
This image, yes.
It was. And did they ask you to remove that because it would have drawn attention to the construction of the rig and specifically the thickness of the cladding and the presence of the 8mm cladding and the 6mm magnesium oxide?
Yes.
Yes. Now, If we look at the bottom of figure 18 on page 35, you can see there's a little speech bubble and a 1,
Yes.
which looks like a sticky, which refers to a footnote. If you turn the page to page 36, please, you can see there is a note, and it's note number 1, author J, and then a long number, subject sticky note, date 1st of July 2014. And there's the note. Can we change this image to the one I've attached with this email to show a close-up of horizontal fire barrier and the insulation below and above the break? The email itself is at CEL401350. And here's the email to Phil Clark. It's at the bottom of page 1 and over to the top of page 2. It's the one I showed you earlier, just before the break this afternoon. And in the second paragraph, you say, as previously discussed, could you also replace figure 18 with the attached photographs, as we want to show a close-up of the condition of our insulation below and above the fire break with the intumescent fired off. If you feel you also have a suitable photograph, then please include. Now, the photographs that you attached, I don't think there's any need to go to them, but they didn't show the magnesium oxide, did they?
No.
And the reason you're giving Mr. Clark here is that you wanted to show a close-up of the insulation above and below the fire break. Was that the real reason?
No.
Or what was the real reason?
To withdraw any reference to the magnesium oxide board.
Why did you need to give Mr. Clark a false reason when, in fact, as you say, he knew the real reason?
Because I was instructed to.
By whom?
By Paul and Paul.
You were instructed to give him a false reason,
Yes.
even though you knew, and is this right, Mr. Evans also knew that Mr. Clark knew the real reason?
Hence, the final report that came back still included that photo.
It did. Do I detect from what you're saying that you were instructed by Mr. Evans to create a false record of the reasons why you wanted the change?
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth because it's a serious point,
Yes.
but what other explanation can you sitting there give as to why you would give Mr. Clark a false reason?
I had to come up with a reason to ask for that photograph to be omitted.
Is it possible, despite what you've told us, and I have to put this to you, that Mr. Clark had no idea that you wanted to omit the reference to the 6mm magnesium oxide and the 8mm Marley Eternit boards, and that he might have thought that this was a genuine reason?
No, I don't believe so, and I believe that's why this figure 18 subsequently wasn't omitted from that test report and was included in the final report.
So you were asking the BRE to remove, in asking them to remove that picture, the only element of the report which should show the presence of the additional material.
Yes.
And that was a deliberate attempt, I would suggest, to create a misleading test report.
Yes.
You accept that?
I do, yes.
And you say you're in no doubt that Mr. Evans knew that, is that right?
That's correct.
And what about Mr. Clark?
Mr. Clark, I think, knew that was a deliberate attempt to remove that photograph and remove any reference to the magnesium oxide.
Now let's look at paragraph 7.16 of your statement. You are there giving your recollection of a meeting that was taking place with Paul Evans on the 19th of June 2014, after the NHBC had left, about this report. And you say there, the reason we considered omitting the image of the cladding from the test report to be a medium risk was because the chances of anyone looking at the full test report were low. I was asked by Paul Evans and Paul Reed to request the BRE to remove the final image from the test report as it would have drawn attention to the construction of the rig, specifically the type and depth of panel used, had anyone seen the photograph and compared it with others in the report. And then you go on to say this. There was some risk in asking for the deletion that it might prompt questions. However, although I did email the BRE and ask them to replace the photograph with another one, and we've seen that, the BRE did not do so in the version of the report which came back to the business. I discussed this with Paul Evans and Rob Warren, and it was decided not to press the point for fear of drawing further undue attention to it. Undue attention from whom?
From the BRE.
But if Phil Clark knew all about it, why would any attention from him be undue?
I think... Sorry, can you rephrase that question?
Yes, if Phil Clark was in on it, as it were, he knew very well that you didn't want to refer, or any reference at all in the test report, to the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide or the 8 millimetres of Marley Eternit Natura at the two locations, and he knew you didn't want that. What would be the problem with pressing the point?
That he changed his mind and included it in the description.
Right. I see. I see. If we then turn back to the final report as issued on the 1st of August at CEL 401109, let's look at page 29. We can see what has now become figure 19, which is the same photograph as before, a slightly better version of it, actually, at least on this draft. So we can take it that the photograph, which was figure 18, that you wanted out, as you told Mr. Clark on the 1st of July, remained in the final report.
Yes.
And as you've told us in your statement, that was a risk you were prepared to live with.
Yes.
And if we look back at paragraph 7.14 of your statement, which we've looked at a moment ago with the chairman, discussion about how often potential customers asked for the full test report, and the conclusion was that this never happened. Was the risk that the business was prepared to run that customers would buy RS 5000 without asking for the full test report?
I think there was a general view within the business that it would be only on limited occasions where somebody would ask for a full test report. As I said previously, I don't think that Celotex would have issued that test report, as they didn't issue any test reports to my knowledge.
So it was the real risk that the business was to run, not a risk to the customer, but a risk to Celotex, that if somebody asked for the full test report and spotted from figure 19 that actually there was an undescribed material lying on the test rig, they would start asking difficult questions.
Yes.
And that was a risk that Celotex was prepared to run, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Can we then go to the classification report? CEL 402133. This is the 12-page classification report itself. Now, we've been through the mini-chronology with this document. This had an earlier issue date of the 4th of August with issue 1, and issue 2 was the subject of minor corrections and was issued on the 11th of August, as we can see. Excuse me. If we look at page 2 of that document, start with page 2. It contains a warning, and it says, this report is made on behalf of BRE Global and may only be distributed in its entirety without amendment and with attribution to BRE Global Limited to the extent permitted by the terms and conditions of the contract. And it then goes on and contains various diagrams showing the tested system. And do you accept, and I can show you the whole of the document if you like, that there is no diagram which shows the presence of the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide?
That's right.
That's right. For example, perhaps we can show people who are looking in on this. Page 6 and page 7. Let's have page 6, figure 1. If we can blow that up. Here is the diagram, system as tested, and there's although it's not, if we can get that bigger on the screen so that people can see the diagram, and particularly the bottom left-hand corner. You can show, right, it may not be possible to do this, but you're familiar with this document, and you can take it from me and agree with me that there's no reference in there at all to the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide.
That's right.
Nor indeed to the 8 millimetre panels at the second level thermocouple or the top of the rig.
No.
No. And we may be able to do better on page 7, figure 2, if we can't. Construction of the system showing the key layers of the cladding system. We can do better there, in fact. Again, we can see that the aluminium continuous rail, the lay profile rivet, 12 millimetres of Marley Eternit Natura panel, and 100 millimetres of Celotex RS5000. No reference to the magnesium oxide board of 6 millimetres, and no reference to the 8 millimetres of Marley Eternit Natura at the level 2 thermocouples or the top of the rig.
That's right.
No. So if you take the test report and the classification report and ask yourself what did the rig comprise, they would be consistent, but equally consistently omitting reference to both of those items.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, can I ask you to go to page 11 in this document? This is section 4 at the bottom of the page. And it says under 4.3 observations, mechanical performance. And then in the second paragraph it says, the cladding system exhibited localized combustion after the heat source was extinguished at 30 minutes. This continued until it was manually extinguished at the conclusion of the test period at 60 minutes. Now, I'd like, if we can do this, to keep that on the screen there, and then pull up what I showed you earlier, but didn't ask you a question about, from the full test report, CEL 401109 at page 9, paragraph 5.1, because I want to compare the two. That's very helpful. If you can see, on the right-hand side, I showed you this before, 5.1 external layer. In the second sentence, it says, it was noted that the insulation layer continued to burn past the 30-minute with the flaming extinguished at 60 minutes. But on the left-hand side, it says the cladding system exhibited localized combustion after the heat source was extinguished at 30 minutes. This continued until it was manually extinguished at the conclusion of the test period at 60 minutes. Now, unlike 5.1 on the right-hand side, the classification report doesn't refer to the insulation supporting combustion, does it?
No.
Do you know why that is?
No, that's the first time that's ever been brought to my attention.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we can put those away and go to your statement again, page 17, and look at paragraph 17.13, please. This, again, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to this meeting, but this was, again, the meeting of the 19th of June 2014 in your Hadley office. You say here, there was a short break in the meeting, and that was the meeting with NHBC, whilst I went to print off the draft test report received earlier that morning. But just to be clear, that's the first draft of the test report, the 2nd of June. And brought it back to Paul Evans' office. Paul Evans, Paul Reed and I looked at it together and noted that it did not refer to the magnesium oxide board in the list of components. My perception was that the board had a clear view as to how they wanted to market the product even before the test report was available. Now, I've shown you that before. And if you go over the page to page 18 and look at paragraph 17.17, 7.17 at the bottom of the page, you say, I did not escalate my concerns about the test report beyond the discussion which I had with Paul Evans and Paul Reed on the 19th of June as described above. My understanding at the time was that the decision not to refer to the magnesium oxide board had been taken by the board and I was following instruction. Did somebody tell you that the board had taken that view or that decision?
No, I think that was my view after what Paul had discussed with me after the Management Action Group meeting on the 14th.
14th of May.
14th of May.
Right, the month before, I see. And did that include a view, or your understanding, that the board had decided to conceal the full details of the design of the rig for the second test in May 2014 from the test report and indeed the classification report?
No, because I don't believe it. At the time of the management action group, the test report wasn't. I don't think anybody had seen a draft report of the test report.
Right. Now, we move forward then to CEL 409742, please. We can see that the final version of both the test report and the classification report was sent to you on the 5th of August 2014. And if we go to page 2 of that email run, we ought to see that. And I've given you a wrong reference. It's CEL 409724, please. 9724. And if you go to page 2 there, you can see, if we go to page 2, yes, thank you. We can see that on the 5th of August 2014, Debbie Kent of BRE sends you the test report and the classification report in their full form, copied to Stephen Howard and Tony Baker at the BRE. And if we scroll up to the bottom of page 1, we can see that you forward those reports to Paul Evans on the 11th of August 2014, and you ask him a question: can we discuss what we want to use as proof that we have passed BR 135, please? Why did you ask him that question?
Because those discussions had taken place since the successful result at the second test. As I said, initially all of the concerns were, firstly, how do we pass the test, and then how do we market that, and what do we use as proof. And I think at the time, I probably didn't understand that you got a separate classification report to accompany the full BS 8414 test report. So I was asking him, as it states, what did he want the business to use as proof?
I follow. So just to be clear, you were asking him which of those two documents you should use?
Yes.
As opposed to, should we use these documents, and if not these documents, what else?
Yes.
So it's the former of those, is it?
It is, yes.
Which of these two documents I should use?
Yes.
I see. Now, he responds to your question higher up page 1 with an email, if we just flick up to that, please, of the same day. Do we have any understanding of what Kingspan do? Did you have a discussion with him about that question?
I would suggest I did, yes.
It would suggest you. Did you recall having such a discussion?
I don't recall, no.
Right. Did you answer him? Did you answer his question?
I would imagine that was a face-to-face conversation that took place.
Right. Did you come to a conclusion between you as to what you should in fact use for the purposes of showing potential customers that you had passed a BR 135 test?
Yes.
And what was that?
The message was that there was some reluctance to issue customers with any reports, and that an abridged version of the BR 135 report should be cut down for use if pushed by a customer.
I see. A cut-down version of or an abridged version of the BR 135 report. So that's the classification report, is it?
The shorter.
The 12-page one, not the 35-page one.
Yeah.
Yes, right. Now, did you understand at that point that he, answering your question and you answering his question in turn, were both agreeing to follow Kingspan's approach and to give the customer, any customer, as little information as you could possibly get away with?
I knew that was going to be their approach, yes.
Whose?
Celotex's.
Right. Following Kingspan?
Yes.
Right. Now, look at CEL 402008, please. This is an email which we looked at before, and we looked at the one at the foot of page 1. I now want to show you the email at the top of page 1. This is from you to Lizzie Seaton on the 14th of August 2014. And you say, "Hi, can you give me a call about this tomorrow morning, please? Thanks, John Roper." Why did you do that?
That was because it'd been agreed that there would be an abridged version created, and Lizzie was a, far more proficient in cutting down a PDF than I was.
Right. So the conversation you wanted to have with her was about abridging the classification report.
Correct.
And she called you?
I believe so, yes.
We can see, I think, the results of that at CEL 409725, please. This is an email from her on the 15th of August, the next day. "Hi, Jonathan. As requested by John, please find attached the classification report for RS 5000. Now, this is an email to Jonathan Room, I think, where we can see that it is copied to you. Are you the John in her message?
I think so, yes.
Right. Now, we know that she sends Jonathan Room an abridged version of the classification report that ran to 4 pages, and we'll look at that in a moment. Was that what you'd asked her to do?
Yes.
Let's look at it. CEL 3011965, please. 3011965. This is the document that was attached to that email. And I just want to flick through it with you. You can see the first page, which is identical to the classification report in its second version. You'll remember there was a small amendment between the 4th of August, issue 1, and the 11th of August, issue 2. That's the first page. And then if we look at the next page, we can see that you have introduction, details of classified product, running to paragraph 2.2.2, and then the next page, page 3 in this run, jumps straight to section 4, test reports in support of classification. And then the next page on is the signature page. Do you know how this was actually produced, this document?
In terms of software or...
Well, in terms of software or hardware, how did Lizzie Seaton actually go about producing this 4-page abridged version of the 12-page full version of the classification report?
I believe it was just with a PDF editor or...
Right. Did you ever see an original version of this?
Of the 4-page...
Yes.
As a hard copy?
As a hard copy?
No.
Did you ever try hard to decipher what was at the header and the footer of each of these pages, which has been obscured by the process of its creation?
No.
If you look at the very foot of page 3, you can just about make out on the right-hand side, at the foot of the page, on the right, it says page 11 of something, could be 12.
Yes.
Clearly, the third page of this document was the 11th page of the original. So it looks to the naked eye, as best we can observe without the original here, that what she had done was either make a PDF of this document or else simply print it all off, pull out the pages she wanted, and make a PDF run of the relevant pages.
Yes.
Do you think that's what she did?
Yeah.
How did she know which pages to pull out from the 12-page version and compile into the 4-page version?
Yeah, that was a conversation that I had with Paul, and I'm not too sure why those 4 pages were chosen and what was overly sensitive around the remaining 8 pages of the BR135 report.
Right. Do you accept that this 4-page version doesn't even identify the Eternit panel used as the rain screen, whether it's 8mm or 12mm, because it cuts off at the foot of page 2.
No, I didn't realise that, no.
Well, we can go through it. It's quite straightforward to do that. If we start with page 1, we have the front page. Let's just do that. Page 2 shows you the list of the description of the product, and you do have 12mm magnesium oxide sheathing board there, and the 12mm Mali Eternit Natura panel there. But then if you go down to the cladding system, where the details are set out, you don't actually even get the actual identification of the panels. You do in the list, I accept, in the bullet point list, but you don't under the details of the cladding system. In fact, it jumps straight to section 4 and has no section 3 at all. Did you notice when you received this abridged version that it had this yawning gap in it?
No, as far as I was concerned, I knew that the images of the construction were not present, i.e. the diagrams of the construction.
Right. It also excludes the disclaimer on page 1 of the full report that I read to you, that the report can only be distributed in its entirety without amendment. Were the BRE aware that you had created this document?
No, I don't believe so.
Right. What would be the point of this filleted version as opposed to the 12-page version? What was it in the 12-page version that you wanted abridged out?
Yeah, I don't know what was so commercially sensitive or confidential about that 12-page report, because from my knowledge, the only contentious issue, i.e. that photograph that we discussed earlier, wasn't included in the BR135 classification. What I would say is that the majority of the test reports that Celotex had in the business at the time were amended in one way or another. I can only refer to this being one of them. Class O reports had black felt tip going through certain sections of reports that were issued as well, so this wasn't uncommon practice for them.
But I don't think you could answer my question as to the rationale for omitting the pages from the 12-page version that are not included in the 4-page version.
Yeah, I don't know the rationale behind that.
Did you intend that Jonathan Room should send this filleted version of the classification report to his customers, if they asked for one?
I think that was the point of the abridged report, that would be the first report that would go to customers should they push for those.
Did you send it to the rest of the sales team for them to send to customers, or just to Jonathan Room?
I don't know.
Right. Now, did you know that Jonathan Room sent this on to Harley on the Grenfell Tower project on the 27th of August?
I do know that, yes.
Did you know that at the time?
No.
You didn't. Did you know at the time that he was deploying it with his customers as early as the end of August 2014?
No.
Now, in fact, it's right, isn't it, that in late August and after late August 2014, some customers were specifically asking for the test report for RS5000.
Yes.
And that came pretty quickly after the launch earlier in August, didn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And if we look at CEL 3010805, this is an email at the very foot of the page from Anthony Harris to Jonathan Room and to you. Good afternoon, guys. As per the email from Robbie Taylor below, we are trying to secure a 6,000 square metre RS5000 for a large Vinci construction project in Stratford. The engineers need the full test report, as the BRE Global Test Report 295255 issue 2 you sent me has some pages missing. It jumps from points 2.2.2 to 4, and within this is the information the engineers want to see. And you go back to him the same day and say, Anthony, please find attached the full version of BR135 classification report. I've also attached the thermocouple data from test report 295255 As discussed, there is a full 45-page version of test report 295255, but the salient information is replicated in the BR135 classification. Did you mean test report 295369 of the 2nd of August 2014, the full version of which is, sorry, 1st of August, the full version of which is 33 pages? Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, I believe so.
Right. In fact, it's not correct, is it, that the salient information was replicated in the BR135 classification report, was it?
No.
Even the 12-page version?
No.
No. And certainly didn't, whether in its filleted version that Mr. Harris had received or the full 12-page version, have included the photograph, which was the only thing from which it was possible to tell that there was 6mm magnesium oxide present.
That's correct.
And orange panels.
Yes.
Can we go to CEL 402131, please? This is the story in October 2014. Here we see, on the 17th of October, at the foot of the page, Stephen Howard of the BRE writing to Debbie Berger and you, classification report for the cladding, that he says, we had a conversation a while ago regarding the content of the classification reports and the level of technical detail they contained. We need to put a lot of info in, but you don't want your competitors to see it. We have come up with a way of doing it. Do you recall that conversation?
I don't know.
Do you remember what he was referring to by, we have come up with a way of doing it?
No, I don't.
Right. If we look at the top email from Debbie Berger on the 20th of October, she responds and says, hi, I'm going to set up a meeting with Steve Howard early next week. And when I say she responds, it's an internal, actually, to you and Paul Evans and Jonathan Room. I'm going to set up a meeting with Steve Howard early next week to talk about how to detail our BRE RS5000 fire report so as it gives us the relevant commercial info without the sensitive stuff. He's got some ideas that could help us. Would you like to come to this meeting? I would value your input. If so, will you give me access to your diary so I can schedule a meeting? Do you know what she was talking about when she referred to the sensitive stuff?
Yes, I think she was referring to the photograph that was contained.
Right. To your knowledge, did Debbie Berger know all about the presence of 6mm magnesium oxide behind the 8mm Marley Eternit Natura board in the test rig?
I can't say for sure.
Right. If she knew about the photograph, do you refer to the photograph at figure 19 in the final report, or figure 18 in the draft that you saw, the one that we looked at before, which shows the white panel?
Repeat the question.
Yes. When I asked you a moment ago about the sensitive stuff, you said, I think she was referring to the photograph.
Yes.
That was contained. Is that the photograph that was figure 18 in the draft report and which became figure 19?
Yes, that's
the one
correct.
that you and Paul Evans and Paul Reed wanted to have removed?
Correct.
Right. Do you know why she thought that was sensitive?
Because of the fact that it was 6mm magnesium oxide that wasn't referred to in any of the literature,
Right.
or the test description itself.
Does that tell us that she knew at least this much, that the test had included a 6mm magnesium oxide board behind 8mm of Marley Eternit Natura, and that was, to use her words, a sensitive subject?
Yes.
Yes. Do you know whether there was a meeting which then took place with Steve Howard?
I don't know.
Don't know. Did you go to one?
I don't believe so.
Right. Now, I want to go now at last to visit the meeting. I say at last, I don't mean that's the last topic, but I say at last because we've dipped in and out of the subject in your statement. With a meeting with the NHBC on the 19th of June 2014, which I think you've covered extensively in your witness statement at section 7, and we've already seen quite a bit of that already because we've dipped into it. Now, that meeting followed your message to Graham Perrior and Dave White of the NHBC on the 15th of May, and you've referred to that in your statement at paragraph 7.1. I don't need to show you that necessarily unless you want to see it, but did you tell them during that message that Celotex passed a BS 8414 Part 2 test? I think you did.
Yes.
Yeah. And you say that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss the above 18-metre project and also some concerns that NHBC had raised about the quality of another Celotex product. Is that right?
Yes.
What was the product?
The other product?
Yeah.
From memory, I believe it was a product for cavity wall insulation.
Right.
It's unrelated.
So not an above 18-metre. No.
No.
Now, to set the scene, as I think we now know, you had received the draft BRE report, version 1, dated the 2nd of June, half an hour before that meeting began. You got it at 10:30. We can see that. We've seen that from the emails.
Yes.
And you say you'd only skim-read it before going into the meeting.
Yes.
Do I take it from that you didn't give them the draft report at the meeting?
No.
Now, if we go to your statement at page 16, we can dip into a bit more of your evidence about that meeting. At paragraph 7.4, you say no mention was made in the meeting with the NHBC of the test Celotex had commissioned in February 2014, nor that a magnesium oxide board had been used to reinforce the fire barriers in the test conducted in May. After Graham and Dave from the NHBC had left, Paul Reed and I reflected on the fact that the NHBC did not seem particularly impressed, and Dave had not been friendly. The reason they were not impressed was that they thought the test had been over-engineered by using a 12mm cladding panel in large format. What did you tell Graham and Dave about the BS 8414 test?
What I was told to tell them was that we've used a 12mm Malia Turnip rain screen, tested to BS 8414 Part 2, and made no reference to the fact that there was a first test or the fact that the second test consisted of 8mm and 6mm magnesium oxide at certain levels.
Did you show them any documents relating to the build-up?
I don't believe so. I think there was a presentation.
Yeah. Now, you say that the reason they weren't impressed was that they thought that the system had been deliberately over-engineered.
Yes.
I say deliberately over-engineered. Over-engineered. Did they think that that was deliberate?
Yes.
Right. So did they actually voice that concern?
Yes, they did.
Right. Did they explain why they thought that was a problem?
They thought it was unreflective of a typical cladding system.
Right. Did you think yourself that that was a fair criticism?
Yes.
Now, following their departure, we know that you then had a meeting immediately afterwards in Paul Evans's office, I think, because you go on to say that.
Yes, that's right.
And is it right that during that meeting, notes were made on a whiteboard?
Correct.
And I think we have a photograph of that whiteboard taken by Paul Evans. If we go to CEL 402517, this is a photograph which he says he took on his telephone.
That's right.
Can you confirm that?
Yes.
And if we look at the whiteboard contents, the top line headings in the chart that he created are NHBC concern stroke challenge, and then a ranking, CX, that's Celotex, response, action required, and risk. Was he the person who put all those columns and words up on the whiteboard, or was it you?
No, it was Paul for the majority, other than point 6.
I see. There's slightly different handwriting in point 6. Whose is that?
That's mine.
Right. Now, looking at item 6, under column NHBC concern stroke challenge, is calcium silicate at level 2. Is that a reference to the magnesium oxide layer?
Yes.
Right. And why did you put calcium silicate?
The terms were used interchangeably in terms of
Yeah.
calcium silicate, magnesium oxide there.
Now, clearly you hadn't mentioned the presence of magnesium oxide to the NHBC at the meeting, and was that for the same reasons that we've gone through today?
Yes.
Could you just articulate those in a sentence?
The message from the 14th of May, as I've said, was no reference to magnesium oxide from that point. So I had to stand up in front of two individuals from the NHBC and lie, essentially.
Right.
And this whiteboard, the description and the responses and the notes that are surrounded and detailed on that whiteboard, the first 5 are concerns that the NHBC raised at the meeting. And they had obviously a number of concerns, as you can see. And my comment to Paul in the presence of Paul Reed was they're not happy with how the test has been engineered, and we haven't even disclosed the real test to them, hence the calcium silicate at level 2.
And under CX response, confidence in fire barriers to expand. I think is that your writing?
That is, yes.
Is that how we should read your writing?
That's right.
That's what it says. And was that the justification that you would have given to the NHBC had they found out about the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide, or might later ask?
Yes, that was.
Who came up with that idea?
Paul and I, really. I mean, it was. Looking back at it now, it's a crap response. It's an excuse to try and hide the fact that there was calcium silicate there in the first place.
Right.
Which.
So you were quite content, you and Paul Evans and Paul Reed, to mislead the NHBC about this?
I wasn't content, no.
Well, not content in your heart, but content as a group.
That's the NHBC approval was they perceived as critical to the success of that product.
Yes. So you were prepared to stand up and lie, as it were, to the NHBC in order to get their approval, which was critical to its success.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then under action required, it says remove last image of test report. Was that a reference to the photograph on page 35, figure 18, as it then was?
That's right, yes.
Right. We know then the story about that. And looking at risk, medium, on the right-hand side, you rate that in, I think. And you say because the chances of anyone looking at the full test report were low.
Yes.
That's what you say in your report. So it was a medium risk based entirely upon the betting on no one asking, in essence.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Now, if we move on to CEL 403180, please. I just want to ask you some questions about the plans. We may be able to take this quite quickly. This is an email from you to Luke Cresswell and Graham Smith at Simcoe on the 23rd of June 2014. And you tell them that in the second paragraph, following our meeting with NHBC, they require our drawing annotations to be technically accurate in line with what we actually tested. Therefore, we need file attached above, etc., to be updated with a 12mm Marley Eternit panel shown on a 12mm sheathing board. It's clear from that you didn't instruct them to insert the 6mm magnesium oxide board and the reference to the 8mm Marley Natura, Eternit Natura. And again, that's for the same reasons, isn't it? You didn't want the diagrams to give the game away.
Correct.
Yeah. And in fact, cutting a long story short, they never did produce such drawings, did they? They never did produce drawings which showed either of those things.
I don't believe so, no.
And that was deliberate on your part not to ask them to do so because you didn't want drawings which did show those items.
Correct.
Can I just ask you to look at an email slightly later in the story, in July 2014, at CEL 50991. This is an email of the 29th of July 2014. At the bottom, page 1, sent by Craig Chambers to you at 1448. And he says, John, how are we progressing on NHBC approval? I see this as an important move on this range. You see that? And then you responded to him at the top. And let's just look at the whole email. You say, Craig, NHBC do not offer an approval as such for this application, but may allow us to use a statement going forward, such as accepted by NHBC, subject to conditions set out in NHBC Standard 6.9. Due to delays at the BRE, we're still waiting for the official test report to be signed off. This should be with us by tomorrow. Once received, we can then go back to the NHBC with the test report, our finalised product literature for RS, and updated test drawings, and alleviate any initial concerns they had. I've been in contact with regular updates to them and have informed them that they can expect the report and drawings by close of play this week. The message to the sales team next week on building control will be, we have achieved LABC approval, which account for 75% of the market, and NHBC is work in progress, but unlike our competitors, we have been transparent from the beginning. Now, the claim that Celotex had been transparent from the beginning was simply not true, was it?
No.
Why did you write it?
Because that was the message that I was told to relay. I think that message actually came straight out of the initial explanation by Paul to suggest that any references to the 6ml magnesium oxide should be null and void. They were happy to progress with trying to use transparency as a competitive advantage, albeit they'd been completely the opposite.
Right, well, that answers my question, which I was going to ask you next. Can we then go to CEL 50992, which is an email from you of the 30th of July, where you send to Dave White and Graham Perrior of the NHBC your final BRE test report. Now, at this stage, I don't think you've actually received the final version, because the final version only came in the first few days of August, didn't it? But you say, I'm now in a position to issue you our final BR135 classification, along with the updated construction drawings and product literature for Celotex RS 5000. Please find these attached. And then you go on to say, we are due to launch this new solution to our sales team next Tuesday. And then in the last paragraph, in the last sentence, you say, I apologise for the delay in getting the revised test report over to you, detailing exactly what was tested, but due to holidays at the BRE, timescales were pushed back slightly. Now, your reference there to detailing exactly what was tested, that's not correct, is it? You weren't showing them a revised test report showing exactly what was tested.
No.
In fact, what you sent them was seriously lacking, wasn't it?
It was,
because it didn't have the additional material.
It was, yes.
And what you sent them was included the revised drawings we've just been looking at, and I don't need to go back to those because they're difficult to read on the screen. But we know that those drawings did not include reference to the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide or the 8 millimetres of Marley Eterna Natura, did they?
That's correct.
No. So, in sending what you were sending to the NHBC at this stage, you were taking a chance, weren't you, that they might spot something amiss from the photograph at figure 18?
Yes, I guess so, yes.
Well, to be fair to you, I'm just wondering whether that's right, because you're sending them the classification, which I think doesn't have the photograph in it.
No.
So, but not the test report. So in the last sentence, perhaps you can help me. When you say, I apologise for the delay in getting the revised test report over to you, were you referring to the test report, or were you referring simply to the classification report?
I think it's the classification report.
Right, I see. In fact, therefore, my question wasn't correct. That there was no chance that they would spot something amiss because they wouldn't see the photograph.
No.
And did you ever send the NHBC the full classification report, including figure 19, with that photograph?
I don't believe I did, no.
Right. And do we take it from that you were very alive to the risks that if you did so, they would certainly spot, or would be very likely to spot the presence of something, a white panel, and ask questions about it.
Yes.
And I want to turn to a different topic altogether, which is the marketing of RS 5000. Mr. Chairman,
There's one question that's slightly troubling me, which I didn't want to interrupt your flow to ask, but I'd quite like to get some help on it. And it concerns what prompted Mr. Clark to issue the BRE's first version report, not making any reference to the magnesium oxide board or the 8mm Marley Eternit. And really what I would like your help on, Mr. Roper, is did you have any conversation yourself with Mr. Clark which either expressly or by way of what one might call a nod and a wink indicate to him that Celotex did not want any reference made to those parts of the rig in any report?
No, because I don't believe at the time that I think regardless of whether that test report came across with the correct description, as I was fully expecting it to, I think they would have just attempted to conceal that test report from the market altogether. I think when it came across omitting the magnesium oxide and the 8mm Marley Eternit from the description, the focus was then, can we remove this?
See, once you've got that report, but what I'd be interested to know is whether you did anything or said anything to Mr. Clark in the course of the various conversations you had with him to lead him to think that Celotex did not want any reference made to those parts of the test.
No, I think the only thing that perhaps I implied was I did, once he'd commented on the fact that 6mm magnesium oxide perhaps wouldn't have made a difference to the result. I think, looking back at it now, the only time that I sort of asked him to re-emphasise that was when Jamie came to the test rig, but no, I didn't try and manipulate him to omit a description of a test.
Right, so as far as you're aware, he did it of his own initiative, did he?
He did, yes.
All right, thank you very much. Do you want to follow that up at all, Mr. Millett?
No, Mr. Chairman, that is consistent with the answers that I got earlier, I think, on the near enough the same topic.
All right, thank you. Well, I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, no, thank you. Mr. Roper, can I just go back on something? Because I may inadvertently have led you down a blind alley, and I apologise if I have. Can I ask you to keep an eye on this email, where you say in it, I'm in a position to issue our final BR135 classification and product literature, and then you refer to the revised test report in the last paragraph. In fact, if you go to CEL 50933, I think we can see what it is you attach to this email. We just go to that. That's not it. I'm sorry, 993. I'm sorry, 993. My fault. And you can see there that this is the 30th of July 2014 global test report, which becomes the 1st of August version as final. So it looks as if what you were sending him, and we've had to work this out by a documentary route that isn't immediately obvious, but I think you have to take it from me that what you were sending him was indeed the global test report.
Right, okay.
Which does include the photograph.
Okay.
So to be fair to you, that's actually the correct way of looking at the record. Do you remember sending at the NHBC this document?
No, I don't.
Right. But I think my question then comes back to the same question. In sending the NHBC this document, were you taking the risk that somebody at the NHBC might spot a strange-looking white panel in what became Figure 19 and ask questions about it?
Yes.
Right. Was that a risk that you discussed with Paul Evans?
I think post our meeting, it was clear that the NHBC had numerous concerns without understanding the true system details, and from Paul's side and from the business's side, they saw the NHBC's approval as critical, and I can only imagine that I've sent this report because that's what's been requested from either Dave White or Graham Perrier.
Right. And is the risk, when we saw on the whiteboard, the allocation of risk under item 6 to this problem being medium, was it the assessment of a medium risk relating to the risk of the NHBC coming back and asking questions?
I think that was a general medium risk of issuing that report to anybody.
Right. Can we then go to the marketing of RS 5000? If we go first, please, to CEL 403125. This is an email from Mr. Evans, Paul Evans, to you on the 27th of May 2014. Saying, just a quick note to request we get 5 mins tomorrow to discuss approach with Jonathan on Friday. If I send this as a chance between us, we won't forget. Is Jonathan Room there?
No, I don't believe it is. I think it's Jonathan of Sangaban.
Oh, right. Jonathan who?
Jonathan Cheeseman. He's a legal representative from Sangaban.
Right. I see. So this has got nothing to do with marketing then, is it?
It has got something to do with the marketing, yes. I think Paul had a conversation with Jonathan Cheeseman at Sangaban to run the literature by him.
Right. As early as May 2014?
I believe so, yes.
Right. Well, if we go to... Well, do you know what was said? Do you know what was said?
No, I wasn't present at that meeting.
Right.
I've also... What I do know that from that meeting that took place, the disclaimer around the onus is on the building control or building owner, which is referenced in the marketing literature, came from that meeting, I believe.
Thank you. Can we then move to CEL 409598, please? And this is an email from Lizzie Seaton to you on the 16th of June 2014, forwarding to you an email she had received from Kelly Slochak, which says in the middle of the page there, we'll just go back a little bit down on page 1, we can scroll down. Hi Lizzie, please see attached the first draft of the RS 5000 press release for your approval. And she's sending that to you for your thoughts. And if we look a little bit lower down to page 2, we can see how this begins on the 12th of June. You send Lizzie Seaton a few salient points which should help the CFA start to put together a first draft of the press release for RS 5000. And in the long list of bullet points there, you see that you say in the 5th bullet point, Celotex RS 5000 also benefits from having successfully tested and approved to BS 8414 Part 2 2005, meets the criteria set out in BR 135, and is therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Now, that language, do you remember where you got that from?
It was taken directly from Kingsman's literature.
Yes. And I was wondering about that. Perhaps I should show you that. Can you please be shown CEL 408510? This is a Kingspan document called Cool Therm K15 Rain Screen Board, Insulation for Rain Screen Cladding Systems. And then if you look at the 3rd bullet point down, it says successfully tested to BS 8414 2002 and can meet the criteria within BR 135 and is therefore acceptable for use above 18 metres. Is that where you got your wording from?
Yes.
And you'll note that it's dated March 2011.
Yes.
So you're 3 years, 3.5 years down the track.
Yes.
Do you know whether that language that you taken from that document changed between the March of 2011 and you're using it in the June of 2014?
I don't believe it did.
Right. Now, going back to your email, if we can, CEL409598, please, page 2. You don't, after that reference there in that bullet point, don't suggest that attention should be drawn in the marketing literature to the limits of the BS 8414 test, do you?
No.
Why is that?
Because that had been discussed, that the prominent message would be just that fifth bullet point, really, that it's successfully tested and approved. And as I said before, I had a feeling very early on in the development that the message around systems would be diluted, and that sort of became apparent during the launch process, really.
Right. So diluted, does that mean that you let me try it differently. You can see the words, and is therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Did you intend to give the impression to the reader of that bullet point that because Celotex had passed this test, it could therefore be used in buildings generally above 18 metres in height?
I think that's what they wanted to convey, yes.
Yeah, but you wanted to convey with your words, they're your words, yes?
Under instruction from that business.
But I understand that. I understand that qualification, but the answer to my question is yes.
Yes.
Yes. And that's what you mean by dilution, is it?
Yes.
Yes. And then you say in the penultimate bullet point, supported by LABC approval and acceptable for use on NHBC projects. In fact, is it right that the LABC at this stage, this is mid-June 2014, hadn't yet issued registered details?
I'm not sure of the exact dates, but that would have just been put forward to, I don't know when the launch was actually planned, but it would have been put forward as a optimistic achievement.
Right, an optimistic achievement. And even more optimistic was the statement that it was acceptable for use on NHBC projects.
Correct.
And given the dates, you hadn't even yet had your 19th of June meeting with the NHBC, let alone the discussion with them about the report, had you?
That's right.
No. Now, if we look at CEL 409599, we can see that all of these bullet points, including the two I've identified to you, were all picked up in the press release. CEL 409599, there it is. Did you draft this press release?
No, I don't believe I did.
Do you know who did?
I think the majority of the press releases came from an external agency.
Right. Did you ever check it? Did you ever check this document?
I would have checked it, yes, alongside Paul.
Right. Well, we'll come back to it in a moment because I've got a number of points on it. But am I right in thinking that your wording you gave to Lizzie Seaton finds its home in this press release in the second and fourth paragraphs? Because we can see that it says there, in the second paragraph, you refer to the test and it says, making it acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. So again, that's another way of putting the same Kingspan originating dilution of the message, yes?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. And then in the penultimate paragraph, you say supported by LABC approval and acceptable for use on NHBC projects. So leave aside the LABC approval. It was simply not true that it was acceptable for use on NHBC projects, was it?
Not at that stage, no.
No.
Mr. Bennett, we probably ought to be giving Mr. Roper a break.
Absolutely, let's do that.
It's probably not a very convenient point, but I don't suppose there'd be a better one.
There is no self-evident mooring point in the near future.
I think we have a break at this point then, Mr. Roper. We'll come back at 20 to 4, and please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to go to the usher, please. Right, 20 to 4 then, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Roper to come back in, please? Ready to go on, Mr. Roper?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Roper, can I just revisit one question with you? And that's your request to the BRE on the 1st of July 2014 to remove the photograph at figure 18 in the then draft. You remember the photograph, figure
Yes.
18? Do you remember having asked BRE to remove that photograph, whether they actually gave you a response?
I don't believe they did, no.
You don't believe they did. So you don't remember ever getting a reaction from the BRE as to why they wouldn't remove it, as we know they didn't?
No, I think the next correspondence was the next draft or the version of the test report.
On the 30th of July?
I believe so, yes.
Right. And by that stage, as I think you've told us, you'd already decided with Mr. Evans not to press the point.
Correct.
Right. Can we then go back to the marketing literature? And I've shown you the press release, which we'll come back to. Can I go to CEL 401213, please? This is an email from you to Paul Evans on the 1st of July 2014. And you attach a marketing action plan. And you say, as discussed, folder J. Roper under M Drive has everything to do with RS in. Thanks. It's a bit of a cryptic message. But let's look at the document. It's at CEL 401214, please. And we can see there that the front page, first page, is marketing action plan, product, Celotex RS 5000, launch date 5th of August 2014. Did you draft this document?
I believe I did, yes.
Did you do it with anybody, or was it just you?
Most likely with Paul, because by the looks of it, this is the first marketing and the only marketing action plan I think I ever carried out.
Right. So you think you drafted it with Paul. Did you do the first draft, or did he?
I don't know. I think he would have probably explained what a marketing action plan looked like, and he would have probably ran through the details with me initially, because it's the first time I'd have seen that.
Right. If we look at objectives, it's the first item on page 2, please. The first item there is to launch Celotex RS 5000 at Northern and Southern regional meetings week commencing 4th August 14. And then you go on to say, leverage Celotex 5000 series and its associated performance benefits into new market opportunities. And then you say, present RS 5000 as Celotex's primary range screen application, offering to compete directly with Kingspan K15 and Rockwool Duo Slab. And then the last bullet point, leverage Celotex RS 5000 to campaign Celotex's focus on third-party certification. Just on that, what does campaigning Celotex's focus on third-party certification mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it was the same from when I joined the business, really, that the only way that, or one of the ways that they tried to differentiate from other insulation manufacturers was by having third-party approvals. There are a lot of manufacturers in the marketplace that didn't have too many third-party approvals, and that was one of their competitive advantages as they saw it.
Right. And the third-party approval would be something from the LABC or the NHBC or the
BBA or yes, yeah.
Right. And then under concept, if you look a little bit lower down the page, you can see that there's a proposition. The first PIR insulation board tested and approved to BR 135 and therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. And again, that's the same dilutive mantra, if you like,
yes,
that you got from the Kingspan data sheet and now finds its way in the marketing action plan.
Correct.
With the same misleading impression.
Correct.
And then you say positioning. Second bullet point, class naught fire performance, and tested on a typical rain screen cladding system to BS 8414. That's incorrect, isn't it? Because there was nothing typical about using 12mm fibre cement board as the rain screen panel, was there?
There was nothing typical about using the 6 mil magnesium oxide, yes.
Right. Okay. Nothing typical about using 6mm magnesium oxide, absolutely. What about nothing typical about using 12mm fibre cement board as the rain screen panel? Or was that more typical?
I think that was deemed as more typical, yes.
Right. Then if we can look at the marketing material itself, is it right that the main pieces of marketing material were the specification guide and the rain screen cladding compliance guide? There were others, and we'll look at those, but those were the two main ones.
Yes, I believe so.
Is that right?
Yes.
And were you involved in producing the wordings for those?
I believe I was. Yeah, within a team that consisted of the entire marketing team and a few members of the technical team as well.
Right. Was there anybody in the marketing team that you knew who knew more about the testing and the classification of the RS5000 than you?
I wouldn't say there was anybody that knew more, but equally there were at least 3 individuals in the room that knew as much.
Who were they?
Jamie, Rob and Paul.
Right. Okay, you're including them in the marketing team.
Correct.
So Jamie is Jamie Hayes.
Correct, yes.
Right. Can we go to CEL 403179, please? This is something called a comms action plan for the launch date 5th of August. And you can see there on that there are 7 sections to it, and the third one is communication activities. Can we go to page 4, please? And on that page we can see, second item down, rain screen cladding specification literature, writing content, and then 2 initials, JH and JR. That's Jamie Hayes, is it? And you?
Correct, yes.
Right. So do we take it from that the responsibility for drafting or wording the rain screen cladding specification literature was yours and Mr. Hayes's?
Correct, yes.
Right. And if we go to CEL 6012, please, we can see the compliance guide. And this is the version as finalised. If we go to page 2 in that, please, you can see that it sets out at the top of the page some text which says, this document provides guidance on complying with approved document B2 ADB2 for external wall cladding systems, fixed to steel frame or masonry constructions. It provides a step-by-step guide to an alternative route to compliance for ADB2 through meeting of the performance criteria set out in BR 135, through testing to BS 8414 Part 1 2002 or Part 2 2005. Now it expressly says there, as we can see, that it's a step-by-step guide to compliance. And if we go to page 3, we can see the steps. BR 135 is there on the top left-hand corner, and then the performance criteria are there set out. And then if you look at the far right-hand column in the guide, it says this, under the 3 pink arrows, the classification applies only to the system as tested and detailed in the classification report. The classification report can only cover the details of the system as tested. It cannot state what is not covered. When specifying or checking a system, it is important to check that the classification documents cover the end-use application. Did you see and approve that language?
I don't believe I did. I think I've seen that from, I don't know, I thought the disclaimer came from Sangaban Legal, but I may be incorrect.
Right. Okay. Did you know that it reflected the language in Annex B of BR 135?
No.
Oh, okay. Did you, at the time, did you read that when you saw either this final version or an earlier draft of it, and note the disclaimer, as you call it?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Did you have any doubts about what it meant?
No.
Was it quite clear to you looking at what you call the disclaimer and what I think I've called with Mr. Room the caveat, it doesn't matter which we call it, was it quite clear to you that the BR criteria and the BS 8414 test was for a full-scale test of a system and not for a product in application?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. Did you see any wriggle room for any interpretation of this language to suggest that a building designer could use RS 5000 with any component of a system other than what was tested and still be covered by the classification report?
No.
No. And does that answer apply to this same statement in all the other marketing literature used by Celotex to market RS 5000?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it stems back from the commercial versus technical argument. I think there were certain individuals that wanted this to be more prominent than others.
Right. And it looks, well, you tell me, looking at this disclaimer here in its place in this document, who won the argument, commercial or technical?
On this page, technical.
Right. And how do you account for it being on page 3 of this document as opposed to the first page?
Sorry, can you rephrase?
Well, let me try it differently. Did you regard this as small print to be found only by the most scrupulous readers of this document? Or did you think that this was a fair presentation and location of the disclaimer that you've called it?
Yes, I think it was fair.
Right. Now, you can see, if you look on to page 4 of this document, the middle column, which sets out the system that was tested. And we've now got the by now familiar list of parts of the system. You've got the 12mm fibre cement panels. Those are the Marley Eternit 12mm panels. The rails, the Celotex, the 12mm sheathing board, the SFS system and the plaster board, but no reference there to the layer of 6mm magnesium oxide or the 8mm of Marley Eternit Natura over it, is there?
No.
No. And again, if we look at diagram 4 below, again, do you accept that that doesn't show the layer of 6mm magnesium oxide or the 8mm of Marley Eternit?
Correct.
Correct. And do you accept that those omissions make the statement of what the system tested was and the drawing thoroughly misleading?
Yes.
And there's no mention of the 8mm Eternit in the same location. So does that tell us that the statement 12mm fibre cement panels is also misleading? Because in the two locations we've seen from the photograph, those panels were 8mm over 6mm of magnesium oxide, making 14mm.
Correct.
So again, thoroughly misleading in that respect.
Yes.
So any designer looking to follow your words of warning, Celotex's words of warning, and to replicate exactly the cladding system that Celotex was describing here in this marketing literature as having passed this test, would in fact be designing a cladding system that had not passed.
Correct, yes.
Now, those omissions and misdescriptions were not accidental, were they?
No, they weren't. They were deliberate.
They were entirely deliberate.
Yes, they were.
And if you had faithfully described the test components as actually used, it would have given the game away as to how the pass had been achieved, wouldn't it?
Correct.
And the actual system that had passed was not commercially viable, at least as a competitor to K15.
That's right.
And do you accept that in approving this document, you were dishonest?
I do, yes. As I said earlier, I felt entirely uncomfortable, but equally useless in the whole lead up from testing through to marketing through to launch. It was one of the contributory factors for me leaving my role as product manager, because I'd felt so uncomfortable to date with what was being published and what was being launched, and I knew there was going to be a level of questioning that came into the business post-launch that would essentially mean that I would have to lie for commercial gain again. So I left my role as product manager and moved into area sales.
Right. And again, just on this, was there nobody you could go to within Celotex and as it were, blow the whistle or
This was
take your concerns to?
This was common practice. I didn't know I didn't know it at the time. As I said, all of the members of the Management Action Board, I believe, were present when Paul presented the truth and the decision was made. I've subsequently heard and seen that this isn't the only manipulation of test data that business has had. I think there were issues around the Class O fire report. I think there were issues around the thermal performance of their entire product range. It was clearly within the culture of that business at that time, and I'm sorry for my part in it. It's something that I should have definitely expressed more of a concern about.
Let's look at the specification guide, CEL 6013, please. If we look at page 5 in that document, it says Celotex RS 5000. And this is just under the heading building above 18 metres. Celotex RS 5000 has been successfully tested to BS 8414 2005, and again underneath that after the brackets, meets the criteria set out in BR 135 and is therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. And again we see the mantra there, so lifted from Kingspan's K15's to March 2011 data sheet straight into your compliance guide, specification guide. It goes on to say the system tested was as follows, and again, no mention there of the 8 millimetres of Eternit or the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide. Same questions again, and you knew that, and that was dishonest for the same reasons we've discussed in relation to the specification guide.
Correct, yes.
Right. And again, that was deliberate.
It was, yes.
And if you look at page 3, and in a way these are similar iterations of the same point. In the last paragraph there, it says RS 5000 is uniquely positioned to help meet these goals. Celotex RS 5000 is a premium performance PIR solution for use in rain screen cladding applications and suitable for use in building above 18 metres in height. And again, that was misleading, wasn't it? Because it suggested that RS 5000 could be used in any buildings above 18 metres in height.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And that was intentional and deliberate and misleading.
Correct.
And then at page 5 again, same mantra we see in the last part of the paragraph above the details of the test. Therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres. Again, same question. That also might lead a reader to believe that RS 5000 was suitable generally in combination with any system and be misled by that.
That's right, yes.
And again, that was deliberate.
Correct.
Now, I think Celotex drafted a handy guide, or produced a handy guide to its products, didn't it? Were you familiar with that document?
Yes, I was, yeah.
That's CEL 50437. 50437. And if we go to page 8 in that document, product descriptions, and here we have Celotex RS 5000. It says it has class 0 fire performance throughout the entire product. And then in the second paragraph, it says is acceptable for use above 18 metres in height, after the reference to the BR 135 criteria. Again, that gives the impression that RS 5000 is generally suitable for buildings above 18 metres in height. So again, do you accept that it was deliberate and dishonestly misleading?
I do, yes.
Now, you referred a moment ago to this being a common problem throughout Celotex with class 0 as well. What were the problems around class 0 that you were referring to?
I don't know the specifics. All I know is I've seen announcements on the website since the tragic events of Grenfell that indicated that they've perhaps come clean about a couple of other issues, one being Class O and one being thermal performance, but I don't know the specifics.
Right. You say thermal performance. Is that a reference to the shenanigans with the Lambda?
Correct, yes.
And I'm sorry to use that expression, but it will become obvious perhaps with other witnesses what that was. But you were familiar with that, were you?
I was familiar with the announcement, yes. I wasn't familiar with the...
Right. Can I then show you the data sheet, CEL 407961? This is another one of Celotex's marketing documents. Was this a document that you had a hand in drafting?
Probably again with the same individuals. It was the marketing team, the technical team.
Right. And was this a document that you would or you did intend to send out as part of Celotex's marketing efforts for RS 5000?
That would have been distributed, yes.
And if you look at this document, it's not a long document, it's only 3 pages. We can see that there's a pink header at the top of each page. It reads, Celotex RS 5000 premium rain screen cladding board, suitable for buildings above 18 metres in height. And that is repeated in the pink banner at the top of all 3 pages of this 3-page document, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Now, there's no qualification there to this thrice-repeated statement. And taken at face value, it was entirely untrue, wasn't it?
It was, yes, and it comes back to the original point of individuals within Celotex trying to dilute that system message as much as they possibly could.
Yeah. Just to say that everybody understands, it was untrue because it wasn't suitable unless the building over 18 metres was going to have the same cladding system and exactly the same build-up as that which had been tested.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And anybody not reading the small print on page 3, the disclaimer as you call it, would think that RS 5000 was, as it says, suitable for use on all buildings above 18 metres.
Correct, yes.
And again, we can see in the second bullet point down, and I'm sorry to keep asking you these questions, but it says again, now, by now mantric expression, therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres. Again, thoroughly misleading, deliberately put forward, and dishonest.
Yes.
Yeah. And I suppose we need to finish this off. If we go to the next page, please. We can see there that there are technical data there with the surface spread of flame as class 1. And then on the next page, we can see the certification and an identification of the system tested and the ingredients of that system. And again, that was misleading because it omitted any reference to the 6 millimetres magnesium oxide and the 8 millimetres Marley Eternit Natura board over it.
Correct, yes.
And therefore, the words, the fire performance and classification report issued only relates to the components detailed above, would itself be thoroughly misleading because the components detailed above were themselves incomplete.
Correct, yes.
And that was put forward deliberately and dishonestly by Celotex.
Yes.
And I include you in that.
Yes.
Yeah. Can we finally turn to the press release, which we looked at before, CEL 9599. Now, in the first paragraph, it describes RS 5000 as a new premium performing PIR solution for rain screen cladding applications. That was untrue, wasn't it? Because it wasn't new. It was simply a rebranded FR 5000.
Yes, yeah, and it was only rebranded RS 5000 to go towards new product sales and that target that we spoke about previously on Thursday.
Yeah. And when in the second paragraph it says the latest addition to the high performance best in class 5000 series, that suggests that RS 5000 was a new product being added to your range, doesn't it?
That's right, yes.
But it wasn't, was it? It was the old FR 5000 rebranded.
Yes.
So this was a false statement.
Correct, yes.
Yes. And if you go to the top of page 2 of this document, it says, again, it's the same point, with the addition of Celotex RS 5000 to an unrivaled PIR insulation product range, etc. That was, again, a false statement, wasn't it?
Yes.
Because this was not a new product.
No.
No. And then, I do now apologise for labouring this point. If you go back to the first page, please. Same point again. Second paragraph. In third line, after the reference to the BS 8414 and BR 135 criteria, making it acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Again, that was deliberately and dishonestly misleading, wasn't it?
Yes.
For the reasons we've discussed.
Yes.
Now, RS 5000 was launched on the 5th of August 2014, wasn't it?
Correct, yeah.
At a regional sales meeting.
Yes.
And at that meeting, I think you gave a presentation, didn't you?
Yes.
There was a slideshow which accompanied your presentation, and that's at CEL 408668. These are your slides. Did you speak to them? Did you present them as you went through them? Speak as you went through them?
Yeah, I believe I did, yes.
You did?
Yep.
And let's start with the legislative background, first of all. Paragraph, or page 4, slide 4. We can see that the presentation addresses the legislative background of the use of insulation above 18 metres. And there is ADB2, BS 8414 and BR 135. Did you explain those pieces of guidance and legislation, if you like, as part of your presentation?
I believe I did, yes.
You did. And if you go to page 7, or slide 7, there is a sliding scale of risk categories with British standards and Euro classes. Do you know where you got that from?
No, I don't, to be honest with you, no.
Did you draft this?
Yes, I believe I did, yeah.
You see, the reason I'm asking is because in the top line, you've got non-combustible, British Standard 476, 4 and 11. And indeed, that's correct, because those are the tests for combustibility, with an equivalent of A1 and A2. But then you've got the next line down, low, class 0. And that would tend to suggest that class 0 had something to do with combustibility, whereas in fact it doesn't. Do you accept that?
Yes, I do, but I don't know where I got that table from, whether that was part of a training presentation that was given to me. I don't know.
Did you explain to the sales teams present that class 0 was a different concept from combustibility, limited combustibility?
I think that was generally accepted at the time, yes.
Right. That wasn't something in respect of which anyone within Celotex was in doubt, was
No.
it? Right. And then if we look at page 16, this is entitled Annex B, 84142-2005, BR 135, and you can see on the right-hand side there is B2, Performance Criteria and Classification Method. And here we can see what you later come to call your disclaimer. The classification applies only to the system as tested and detailed in the classification report. The classification report can only cover the details of the system as tested. It cannot state what is not covered. When specifying or checking a system, it is important to check that the classification documents cover the end-use application. And there's an arrow pointing to it, and it says System Classification. This suggests that this presentation did highlight to the sales teams the fact that BR 135 only applied to the system and not individual components.
That's right, yes.
Yes. But if we then go on to slide 25, which you would have come to not long afterwards during your presentation, I guess, we can see headline points there. And these are the key properties of RS 5000. And if you look down there, you can see in the penultimate bullet point, suitable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. Now, taken as a standalone statement, I think we've already established that that's misleading because it wasn't suitable for any building above 18 metres, was
Yes.
it?
No.
No, and there's a very heavy caveat that would apply to a statement like that, which simply doesn't find its way into this slide.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Again, it goes back to that commercial versus technical argument, I'm afraid. I felt it was important to bring the sales team up to speed in terms of what the actual regulations were and the system classification, but equally, in the back of my mind, I was conscious that I had two individuals in the room, as a sales director and a head of marketing, that were equally trying to push a product in application rather than a system.
Does that tell us that although your slideshow referred to the disclaimer, as it were, as small print quite early on, the bigger message you wanted to get across to the sales teams was that they should be selling this for more general application?
That was the view of numerous individuals in the business, including Craig Chambers. I think he wanted that 18-metre message to be much more prominent than what they classed as technical jargon to associate alongside
Right.
that product launch.
Now, you referred to Craig Chambers. I was asking you, this is your slideshow, and I appreciate that you're, as it were, operating under instructions. I understand your evidence about that. But was it your intention that you wanted, although to have the disclaimer there in the slideshow, to make that less prominent, but to make it more prominent to the sales team, but this was a product suitable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height without the disclaimer?
I don't know what I wanted from the presentation, to be honest with you. I wanted to get across the message that it was a system, and I was clear in my head that it was a system. But I equally had members of the management group that were in that room that didn't want that message to be so prominent. So,
right, I see. So the reference to BR 135 and the disclaimer in the early part of the slides was there to give Celotex plausible deniability in the face of a clearer message that this was a material or product suitable for use more generally above 18 metres.
yes.
Yes. And then if we go to the next slide on, 26, the message we see in the penultimate bullet point we've just been looking at is then compounded by the mantra, therefore acceptable for use in buildings above 18 metres in height. So that then reinforced the message about the general nature of the application of this product, despite the fact that the test was a narrowly prescribed one.
Correct, yes.
Can we go back a little bit in the slide pack to slide 18? Latest addition to 5,000 range. And you can see there are 5 balloons or bubbles. Celotex FR 5000, multi-purpose solution. Celotex CG 5000, cavity wall solution. Celotex GD 5000, plasterboard laminate, dot and dab. Celotex GS 5000, plasterboard laminate, mechanical fix. Celotex RS 5000, rain screen cladding solution. Now that rather suggests that Celotex RS 5000 is a new product being added to the existing range which included Celotex FR 5000, doesn't it?
Yes.
That was untrue, wasn't it?
It wasn't a new formulation, but in context of that slide, the differences between FR 5000 and CG 5000, the first two products that were listed there, the only difference there was board size. One was cut down to a smaller board size. So that same formulation followed through 1, 2, 4 of those products were exactly the same.
Right. My point is slightly different, that Celotex RS 5000 was simply FR 5000, rebranded, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
And therefore, RS 5000 wasn't a latest addition to the 5000 range because it was already in the 5000 range in the guise of FR 5000.
Yes, but it was marketed that way because of this drive towards a percentage of turnover coming from new product development if it fell within, if they retained the FR 5000 product name for use in buildings above 18 metres, it wouldn't have contributed to the new product development turnover. Hence, it was rebranded Rain Screen 5000.
I see. So was it a deliberate choice of Celotex to pretend to have two different products, whereas in fact it was the same product?
Yeah, and that wasn't uncommon across the whole of the range. There are universal products that in formulation are exactly the same, but there are differences only really by the name.
Right. Did you tell your sales team that in fact RS5000 was not a new product at all? It was simply RS5000 rebranded so as to be able to get into the above 18 metre market?
No, that was not the message they wanted me to convey.
Why is that?
Because with any new product range, they always wanted it to be perceived as brand new, despite the fact that the formulation remained exactly the same.
So you and those from whom you took your orders were content even to go so far as to mislead your own sales team in this respect?
Yes.
And I'd make the same point again, I think, on slide 46. If we can go to that, please, page 46. We can see e-shots and then a mini slide within it. Celotex launch above 18 metre board, Celotex RS5000. And then the first paragraph says, committed to ongoing product development. Celotex has launched RS5000 specifically designed for rain screen cladding applications and the latest addition to the 5000 series. That was not true, was it? Because it hadn't been specifically designed at all.
No, it's gone through a test at the BRE.
So this statement that Celotex RS5000 had been specifically designed for rain screen applications was intended to mislead not only your sales team but the public or the customer with whom any of your sales teams innocently made this statement.
It was intended to, yes, to be perceived as a brand new solution.
Right. And by not telling your sales teams, were you protecting them from a charge of deceit which a customer might make to them when they did discover that this wasn't in fact a new product at all?
I don't think that was taken into consideration.
Right. Why not simply tell your sales team, look, this isn't actually a new product, it's an old product rebranded?
I think the view was that it would confuse the message. What was clear at the time is that when Saint-Gobain took the business over, is that Celotex had numerous products that were applicable to multiple applications, i.e. floors, walls, roofs, the same product, i.e. FR5000. What they wanted to focus on was application-specific product ranges, and RS5000 was the first opportunity to create a new application-specific product.
Well, why not just say, well, you can now use FR5000 anywhere on the building, below or above 18 metres?
Because it wouldn't have contributed to the new product sales.
So in order to contribute to the new product sales, you had to lie about it?
I had to rebrand it.
And then tell your sales team, and through them, any customers, something which wasn't true?
From a formulation perspective, yes.
Well, from that statement on the page, specifically designed for rain screen cladding applications, that wasn't true?
No.
So do you accept the point I'm putting to you?
I do, yes, yeah.
Thank you. And then if we go to slide 27, this is a diagram of the system, Celotex and BR135, and we can see there the by now familiar ingredients or components of the system purported to have been tested. No reference there to the 6 millimetres of magnesium oxide and no reference there to the 8 millimetres of Marley Ternit Natura. And again, that slide, for those reasons, was misleading, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
So again, you didn't even tell your own sales team about the true makeup of the rig that was tested successfully.
That's right.
Why didn't you tell them that?
Because that was the decision that had been had been taken in the business.
Yes.
They not only didn't they want to disclose the true test later on when the product was launched, and there were requests for that test report. I think the majority of the time the sales team were refused such information.
Was it your intention that the Celotex sales teams should not be aware of the fact that the test rig for the BS8414 test was not in fact as shown in the marketing literature or on this slide?
It was Celotex's intention, of which I admit I was a part of.
And what was the reason for not telling your sales teams the truth in that respect?
I don't know. I think that decision was made above me.
Right. If we go to slide 32, this refers to three things. Celotex RS5000 included in BR135 LABC approval and presented to NHBC. Unique product code for project tracking, and then incurred substantial development costs. In fact, it's right, isn't it, that the only development costs were those for testing and marketing?
Correct, yes.
There weren't any R&D or chemical or analysis
No.
product costs, were they?
No.
So to that extent, incurred substantial development costs is apt to mislead, because it rather suggests that this is a new product on which money had to be spent in development.
Yes, I guess the cost of the two tests and the marketing were substantial in relation to previous developments that had taken place, and that's why that statement was in there.
Now, we've seen nothing in these slides which even mentions the first test, which was unsuccessful in February 2014. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, yes.
Why was that?
Because of the decision to omit any reference to that first test and subsequently omit any reference to the magnesium oxide.
So just summarising where we've got to, on your launch day, do you accept, I think you do, that you didn't tell your sales team three things? First of all, that there'd been an earlier BS8414 test that had failed, or that the second test had only passed by reason of the presence of a 6mm magnesium board behind the Marlier-Turner 8mm rain screen in two places, which wasn't in the literature, or the test report, or the drawing. Or even the third thing, which is that RS5000 was simply FR5000 rebranded. That's right, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
And each of those omissions, taken separately or all together, made your own presentation of RS5000 to your own sales marketing teams thoroughly misleading.
Correct, yes.
And you knew that?
I knew that, yes.
And was your idea that they would then innocently practice the same deceit on a Celotex's intended customers for this product in order the better to sell it?
It certainly wasn't my idea, no.
All right. Was the idea of those from whom you took your instructions, so far as you could tell, that the sales teams would then innocently practice this same deceit in these three respects on Celotex's intended customers, the better to sell this product?
I think so, yes.
Right. Who else in Celotex knew that you were planning to mislead your sales team?
Who else?
Yes.
Well, Paul, Rob, Paul Reed obviously knew the details of the actual test. I can only presume that all of the members of the management action group, but nobody ever confirmed that to me.
Did any members of the management action group ever actually see this slideshow?
Yes, I believe there were numerous directors or heads of a department that were present at that launch.
Who were those? Who were they, please?
Sales director, head of marketing, head of technical. I don't know whether Craig was present at that launch or not.
Right. Can you just give me their names? Sales director, who was that?
Paul Reed.
Head of marketing?
Paul Evans.
Paul Evans. Head of Technical?
Rob Warren.
Oh, well, okay, so the same people as you told me before, but possibly Craig Chambers, but you can't recall.
I can't recall whether he was...
Very well. I'd now like to turn to the subject of your relationship with the NHBC and look at that. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I'm going to finish this tonight, but I don't have that long. It may be convenient to stop now. I'm conscious that the witness has had a long day.
He has.
We could start the topic.
And if we're going to turn to a new topic, maybe he and others might like a bit of respite at this stage. Because you're going to ask him to come back tomorrow anyway.
I am.
Yeah. Can you give me any help as to how long you think he might be tomorrow?
Yes, I may be able to shorten this overnight a little bit, but it's unlikely. I would think probably an hour tomorrow morning.
Right.
And then a break, and then follow-up questions, which history shows us doesn't take that long, but one has to allow proper time.
Yeah. And that's helpful, because I'm sure Mr. Roper wanted to know quite what time was required tomorrow. But I think it's better to stop at this point.
Very good.
Yeah. We're going to call a halt for the day at that point, Mr. Roper. As you heard me say to Mr. Millett, I'm afraid we are going to have to ask you to come back for a little bit longer tomorrow. I don't suppose you had that factored into your timetable, but I'm afraid that's the way it is.
Okay.
So we'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Mr. Millett's best guess is that he'll take about an hour with you. There'll be some follow-up things after that. So if you're planning your day tomorrow, you might be wise to not to expect to leave here much before midday. Can't guarantee what the time will be, but that gives you some idea of where we're going.
That's fine, yeah.
All right?
Yeah, okay.
All right, well, if you'd like to go to the usher now, we'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And again, please don't talk to anyone while you're away from the hearing room about your evidence or anything to do with it, that is.
That's fine.
All right?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. 10 o'clock tomorrow then, please.